read from his seminal collection, Grey Owl, The Mystery of Archie Billey.
Pleasure. I can't remember when's the last time I got a Queen, so it's been a while. So I kind of come from the opposite end of the spectrum. I've been publishing now for a while. This is my second book. It came out, I guess, in the 90s. And but I forgot to mention, I actually published another book last year, and I thought I should mention it because I'm here as both a scholar and a creative writer. So I co-edited this book last year called An Anthology of Indigenous Literature in English for Oxford, Voices from Canada. And one of the things that was missing from the previous, actually I was part of a previous edition, but one of the things Oxford and I came to the conclusion was missing was a timeline, because there's never been a timeline of Indigenous lit. Everybody has a vague idea who's been publishing, and so I actually put a lot of effort into it, because a lot of the stuff I really had to research and dig around. So it goes from, of course, time memorial, and then it goes to the 1700s and onward, right to contemporary times here. And it really focuses on the seminal moments in the history of Indigenous literature. And I think for anybody teaching it, it's an important thing to have. I think it's a vital tool. Another thing that we did was we actually dated all the poems in the book, which hadn't been done before, and that took a lot of research. Man, no wonder I forgot about this book. It's a nightmare. And so if you want to talk about editing a big collection, because it's 690 pages, you can talk to me. So we went right back and worked our way right through all the previous editions, looked at all of them, put in new writers, lots of new issues like gender, violence. Of course, it's always been there, but now it's at the forefront, particularly missing and murdered girls and women. Looking at, and not only thematic concerns, but also stylistic, new forms of expression, new experimental work. Well, Jordan Abel, another poet will be coming here, including people like him. So that was graphic. There's even an excerpt from a graphic novel in here, just opening up the field. So and I wrote a long introduction, revised the previous introduction that I had written, really outlining where it's come from, where it's going, and everything in between. So I did that. And most of you don't know me from Adams, so I'll just say that in terms of creating my Ojibwe name Gishkoweke, Dishnakos, Anishinaabe Moyen, is my Ojibwe name. From Chapel, Fox Lake First Nation, which is, they put Cree on here, but it's Cree and Anishinaabe. That's still a contention. I never said it. But it was, we never got to choose. In fact, we're choosing a new name in our language, because we, as you probably know from colonialism, none of us got to choose anything, and everything is being renamed. So that's kind of an ongoing project, to bring a lot of things back to original names. And I've been shortlisted for the Governor General's twice. I have an honorary life membership to the League of Canadian Poets. And last year I was given the Latner Prize for my body of work by the League of the Writers Union. No, not the Writers, the Canada Writers Trust. This came out 25 years ago, and the publisher contacted me and said, we'd like to republish it because it's dealing with a lot of the issues we're talking about today, such as appropriation and identity politics. And so I actually wrote an introduction to this, and I'll just read just the beginning, and then I'm going to read a little section, and I'll read a couple of poems. So it's called Grey Owl, The Story of Encounter and Transformation. And for those of you who don't know who he was an Englishman who came to Canada at the turn of the last century. And when they say he went to live with the Ojibwe in Northern Ontario, those Ojibwe were my grandmother's parents. So he lived in our community. And so my grandmother had all these photographs. So I've got about 30 of them in the book. and she told me stories, and then and I thought I'd write a couple of poems, but one thing led to another, and I ended up with this book. To begin, I have to return to a young boy of 11, and the time his grade school teacher decided to show a film of Grey Owl and his beavers, rawhide and jelly roll to the class. The moment the film began rolling, and as the kids in the class grew more and more excited, the boy was struck by the realization that he recognized the man in the film. This was the same man as the one drumming and doing ceremony with his great uncle in the old black and white photograph that he had tacked on his bedroom wall. He had heard stories from his relations about this man, that he had been famous, but the boy had no idea as to what extent. After the film was over, the boy waited for everyone to leave and then went nervously up to the teacher and told her about Grey Owl's connections to his family in the little village of Biscotasing just up the railroad line. She was in the midst of putting away the projector, and her reaction was more or less to dismiss the boy. Perhaps she didn't believe him. Perhaps she was just too busy. Whatever the case, when I think of Grey Owl, I am still reminded of that moment in class and of knowing things about the man on the screen that none of the other kids knew. So from there I jump all over the place, but I just want to read one other paragraph here. Today, any mention of Grey Owl is connected with contemporary questions of power, appropriation, conservation, environment, women, and of course, Indigenous culture. It is a complexity that hit home when I was writing the book and spoke to those Indigenous people who had either met Grey Owl firsthand or knew people who had known him. My first recollection is my grandmother, who as a girl had literally dyed his hair while he was living with her parents in northern Ontario. "Oh, that Archie," she said, shaking her head when I asked her about him. She reminded me that he was like part of the family. Then there's John Tatusa's family in Saskatchewan, who questioned me about my motives when I asked about their father's relationship to Grey Owl. "You know, our father liked him," they said, when I explained who I was and how I came to be writing about him. I have to say that this reaction was not something unique, but seems to have been the general attitude of those who had met him, as Karsh so eloquently encapsulates. I think a younger generation of Indigenous people tend to forget these facts when they dismiss Grey Owl outright as the old appropriator. And I just want to... In writing this book, the more I talked to people, the more I began to see shades of gray in the Grey Owl story. And my black and white opinion of Archie Delaney, the fake Indian, began to be colored by other attitudes of Indian peoples of an earlier generation. The more I thought about him and wrote, the more I began to see something that had been right in front of me since childhood. It wasn't Archie Delaney who appropriated Indian culture, Anishinaabe, though he publicly called himself Apache. It was Indigenous people who assimilated him. What I realized is that he didn't have the agency, they did. This may be difficult to believe in our present age, but it makes perfect sense. That he started off as a lonely, abandoned child, finding solace in a dream of being a red Indian, certainly served to fertilize the soil, so to speak. But the reality of it only came later when he actually met Anishinaabe, beginning with his first wife, Angela Laguna, on Bear Island, and later Alexis Spaniel in Biscotasing, his father figure. They, among others, are the people who taught him to think like an Indian. Despite his unpredictable behavior, they saw something in him they liked. And later, when he began to attain fame, they saw that he was using his extraordinary gifts for the greater good. If he got carried away in the role, it didn't matter. So, I'll just read a couple as well. Let's see here. So This is like, you know, when they republished this and they sent me this couple copies, it was like visiting an old friend. I picked this up and said, wow, I haven't seen you in years, Archie. Where have you been hiding? So my grandmother told me a bunch of stories, and this is one of them. So just for backstory, back in the day, so when they made cheese, they made it in boxes. They were round. They looked like, you know, hat boxes kind of. Annie Spaniel, 1923. He comes in all serious, sits down at the table beside me, and says he's organizing an Indian war dance for Queen Victoria Day. I smile to myself when he tells me this, and I look at the long face he makes. So I say, Archie, what's an Indian war dance? None of us Indian people have had one of those recently. For Archie, that's okay. He's going to take care of everything. He'll show everybody what they're supposed to do. Of course, he needs my help to make a special suit. You can't have an Indian war dance without a costume. I agree, and he brings home some brown material and red ribbons from the lumber company's store. He draws me a pattern, and I make it up for him. When I'm finished, he paints on little arrows, adds animal teeth and bones. He does a good job. It's when he makes the drum out of the cheese box that I have to shake my head.